What's going on, team? Welcome to part 3 of our perspective series on navigating now. My name is Jonathan Perez, senior consultant at Thoughttium. As a reminder, this perspective series has been focused on the secrets of high-performing teams. This will be the third of 3 episodes, so the final part of the series. If you haven't checked out the other 2 episodes, highly recommend you check them out. If you go to thoughtteam.com/perspectives, you'll find the article there. You'll check out the page. You'll also see an area to download a toolkit, which we included. So for this episode in particular, on the final part, we have the privilege, the honor to bring on John Ashton, who is Chief of Staff, Go-to-Market at Braze. And we've known John for a little while now, and not only working with him, but just knowing his experience working with high-performing teams made him a great fit to bring him on and share about his own experience and his own definition of high-performing teams. And in particular, the experiences that he has, I think will give a lot of value to you as you listen here in terms of key behaviors and key distinctions that make a team high-performing. So let's bring John on. Okay, welcome, John. We are live.
Hey, Jonathan, how's it going?
Doing great, doing great. So thank you again for joining us at 9 p.m. from London. Your dedication is great.
I've got the caffeine going probably a little bit later than I should do. So
yes, you got the English tea going. Of course, it makes
Cool.
a lot of sense. Awesome, John. Well, thanks for jumping on. We're super excited to have you. I know that just from our time working together, getting to know more of your experience and your background, it's awesome. A lot of the work that you've done, I know through the military, different perspectives in terms of working with different types of teams. Of course, now within Braze, a lot of the work that you do. And so, hey, I thought you were a great fit to come and talk about high-performing teams. And one of the things in particular that stood out is that you have experience working with different types of teams in different situations where maybe different types of leadership styles are contributing to the high performance. So we'll get to more specific behaviors in terms of leadership that you witnessed that contributed to that on the teams. But to kick off, I would love to hear from your perspective what you think or how you define high performance on a team. How would you define that?
Yeah, I think it's very personal, the definition, your own definition of high performance, and also very situational. When I think about significant and different phases of my career, which are broadly split across the military, where I was an infantry officer in the British Army, and then my time in technology with Braze, from Series C startup to we just passed our 3rd year as a public company. So a lot of growth. Very different cultures, very different challenges, and very different personalities with their own definition of high performance. From a military perspective, it was fairly straightforward, achieving the mission with and through your stated values and standards. The military, as you may expect, has a big focus on values and standards. My last job in the Army was at a phase 1 training establishment, and the only thing that recruits pretty much would get failed on, other than really serious injuries, was a breach of values and standards. If they failed their fitness test, train until they pass it. You can't shoot straight, train until they can. But if there was some sort of compromise of character that called their ability to be a trusted member of a team into question, then that would be grounds for them to not continue. Within that focus on the mission and values and standards, the mantra for leaders was always mission, men, self. And on a kind of a more tactical level, the highest performing teams that I was a part of and saw in the military just did the basics to a really, really high standard all of the time. And it was nothing complicated, nothing crazy. They just nailed the basics all the time, relentlessly. Mm-hmm. From a Braze perspective, in the commercial world, and I've spent the majority of my time at Braze over the last 8 years in sales. From a sales perspective, the most high performing sales AEs and sales teams were able to employ the right blend of knowledge, skills, and attitudes at the right moment.
Mhm.
So knowledge, certainly in our space, and I think just in the world at the moment, the nature of like being in the information economy, it's very transient, it's very dynamic. What we know and need to know this quarter is probably going to change next quarter. So skills are more important, and probably the first skill is coachability and intellectual curiosity, so that you can learn and embrace that new knowledge that is required for your situation. Beyond that, the kind of normal sales skills that you would expect around objection handling, negotiation, and value articulation. I think the most important of the three, I kind of feel for all the algebra fans out there, I kind of think of it as an equation, like success equals knowledge plus skills in brackets to the power of attitude. The attitude is more important. And for us, self-starters, a sense of urgency, healthy competitiveness within their team a little bit, but we work in a very competitive market. So bringing a certain passion, we were a startup not that long ago and a real challenger, still are in many aspects, challenger in the market. So that requires a certain amount of evangelistic energy to get people to see a new way of doing things, a different way of doing things. And yes, whilst we've got the proof points and, the amazing tech slides and whatnot, it kind of starts with how that individual is showing up and the passion that they're bringing to the situation. The only thing I call out from a Braze perspective, I think this is relevant to high growth companies, certainly, is the old saying of building the plane as you're flying it. Plays out across multiple vectors, just hitting the near-term goals consistently whilst improving processes, identifying new opportunities, hiring, and building a company whilst you're operating a company at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the distinction you made between the two types of cultures in which high performance shows up. One of the things I want to double click on really quickly, you mentioned with the military experience in particular, that the basics were being done really well. And so what I love about that is that it doesn't seem to overcomplicate this idea of high performance and leadership, because sometimes it can seem very convoluted in a way where actually if you're just hitting the basics, it can be shown that it actually works really well. What are some of those basic behaviors that you would call out? And from that particular experience, what are some things that you'd call out that they were doing really well at the fundamental level?
From a very functional perspective, be called skills and drills, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. So at a very basic level, like how good were the soldiers at maintaining their kit so that they could operate and deploy at a moment's notice? How good are their basic, maneuvers on the battlefield and coordinating as a team, be that fire and movement? These are the army effectively, when it's not deployed and at war, it's a training organization and constantly on exercise and being drilled on these things over and over again. I guess from more of a culture and values and standards perspective. So the Army's stated values were selfless commitment, discipline, respect for others, courage, both physical and moral courage, and loyalty. And that, I guess, shows up at various places in all of our days, often when you least expect it. And then the standards, because values don't really count for much, if they're not backed up with behavioral standards. It's, I guess, how our values are represented. And that was, in the army context, lawful, appropriate behavior and total professionalism. Again, these things will mean different things to different people. And there is a certain amount of subjectivity. But having that framework to bring back a certain situation or something that somebody has or hasn't done was very useful in informing the conversation and being able to get people on the same page as to what is and what isn't expected.
Yeah, so it sounds like there was clear behaviors and values that they can aspire to, and so it sounds like they were the people that were doing really well would really align their behaviors and their attitudes, from what you were saying, in alignment to those values and those behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously leaders play a really important role in that. But I love this concept of teamship as well. And some of the best teams that I've seen and been privileged to be a part of, a self-regulating environment. It doesn't take a leader or an authority figure to crack the whip or point something out. People have signed up and believe in a certain way of doing things, and if they see something that isn't up to scratch, then it'll get corrected from within. Rather than having to be addressed from without.
Yeah, makes sense. Teamship. I like that. I've never heard of that term, but it makes a lot of sense. I like it.
Yeah, I came across it through the High Performance podcast, which I definitely the UK podcast with a journalist and a psychology professor, and they bring in a range of different people, entrepreneurs, famous sports people, people have done impressive stuff. And it was Clive Woodward, who was the manager of the World Cup winning England rugby team. He had a big focus on teamship, and from an early point, set the squad down and say, okay, these are our rules, our non-negotiables. Like, we all good with that? And I don't expect to have to call people out on this. Like, it's your guys' responsibility now. Like, police yourselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's a sense of like team accountability and alignment to what we're doing together collectively, which is great.
Yeah.
So knowing that you've been part of different teams and cultures, and you've not only been part of those teams, but I know that you support and you help lead different teams. Walk us through from your experience. If you were to highlight, imagine you were, I know you've seen us talk about this idea of teaching a class. Like, if you were to teach a class on how to have a low performing team with a crappy culture, what would you say are the necessary components? What are the keys that you've seen to have a really poor performing team? What would you call out?
That's a good one. I think I've been fortunate, whether through luck or judgment, to have not been a part of or exposed to too many low performing teams or toxic environments. And I was racking my brains ahead of this. The only one that really jumped out was a football team that I played with a few years ago in my hometown in the UK. And this was a mixture of students and non-students. A university had merged with a local football club. And basically it was a very low performing team that got relegated because people were there for different reasons. People at different phases of life. The students understandably there to have a good time. They're going out the night before. It's kind of a vehicle for their social life and their drinking club. Get it? There once myself. But for the non-students, whilst it wasn't a super competitive high standard of football, we're still giving up most of our Saturday to play for a team, and we're all competitive. We want to try and win. And it was a bit of an affront to people who weren't students, and kind of approaching it from that perspective, because it felt like a waste of time. Like, we're here for different reasons, and we're not here to win titles necessarily, or we appreciate this isn't the highest echelons of English football, but still, let's take it seriously. Beyond that, I can go back to my previous answer. When values within a team aren't stated and followed, there's no charter. You can't have trust within that team. Nobody really knows where they stand. I think it's one of the primary responsibilities of a leader just to hold that space, because human beings naturally just want to feel like we know where we stand, and have that kind of comfort and confidence in what to expect. And if a leader isn't providing that, then it's a really toxic, stressful environment where you just simply can't, bring your best self to work, and achieve good things. I think the only other call I'd make is, and it's kind of tied to that point, it's around confidence. When leaders sometimes change, or when a team's been performing badly, like, they're not necessarily like bad individuals, but they're not doing what they need to do as individuals or a collective. Confidence is really low. And if a leader isn't coming in with that confidence in themselves and their team's ability, then things aren't going to get better.
Gotcha. So I'm hearing confidence is a big piece, just the one you just closed out on. So if we were to have a low performing team, you'd have low alignment to values, or you might not even have values in the first place. And then the other big piece I heard in that was, just based on your example, poor alignment to a big reason why we're doing what we're doing, or maybe not an alignment on purpose or a mission as to why we're on the team in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've been working together recently, and one of the things I love about the way you approach leadership enablement is starting with leading oneself and defining your own values and purpose. Now, and that being your kind of your moral compass, your guide. And now, of course, we're all going to be part of organizations that will hopefully have their own stated values and stated purpose. And not to geek out too much on map reading, but you think of it like grid north, like the actual lines lead up to the North Pole, and then magnetic north, which is about 500 kilometers away. Magnetic north is your own personal like north, and grid north is like the company or organization or environment you're part of, that north. There's always going to be a slight divergence, and that's okay, but they need to align very, very closely. You know, both for yourself, the organization you're part of, your team, the values you're setting for that team. And it all starts with thinking deeply about that. Now, these things are fluid, they change over time, and you know the work's never really done. But you've got to at least try and then state it so that people have got something to rally around.
Yeah, makes sense. I love that. So yeah, that lack of alignment is a big one that we see, and there can be a lot of drama or conflict if we're not aligned to why are we on this team in the first place? What are we really trying to go for? And of course, there can probably be, as you mentioned, a lot of lack of trust within the team ultimately.
Absolutely.
So one of the things, John, that I saw in your experience, to shift gears a little bit, was, and I had the title here, so it's called The World's Toughest Row. And to me, that looked like something badass that you did, and I wanted to hit on that. So tell us what that was, and the reason why I wanted to hit on it is because it seems like you and that group of people had to come together to do something really difficult and challenging, which required not only individual leadership, but I would imagine really high performance in terms of expectation. So I'm curious if you can just share high level what that was and what it was about. And then if you can give us a download on what the experience of working on that team was like.
Yeah, so this time last year, I was about 1 week into a 41-day crossing of the Atlantic on a little rowing boat with 3 other blokes who I got to know very well, probably a bit too well. Yeah, so this was a kind of combination of a 2-year campaign, really, as you would imagine, in terms of getting the sponsorship, getting all the equipment, doing all the training, all the safety training, all the courses. It was a very large undertaking, and a phenomenal experience. Like going back to the situational definition of high performance, for us, it was achieving our stated goals through with our stated values. And so we're all from a military background, so we all held values and standards at the heart. Our stated goal was to get across safely, was to hit our fundraising target, and to step off the boat better friends than when we stepped on. And we achieved all of that. So that was, to my mind, and per our definition, that was a high performance team. You know, we came, I think, about 11th in the rate out of 38. You know, there were 2 and 3 man crews ahead of us. You know, we didn't break any records, but we did what we said we were going to do. And we did it with our values as well, which we also stated deliberately. And that was never give up, or resilience, gratitude, and believe the best. So I had visions, and people watching my visions of, you know, ocean conquerors surfing down 40-foot waves with wind in your hair and like epic adventure. But, you know, the high performance moments and reflection were when those values showed up in the real dark moments. You know, you're rowing 12 hours a day, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, like very arduous, challenging environment, seasick, homesick, everything sick. And in those low points, it's really easy to see something that someone else is doing as like, and it really pisses you off. It's like, I don't mean it, but like, because you're worn down and you're ratty, like it affects you. It can affect you really deeply. Yeah. And you've got to go to that believe the best. Like they're not doing anything intentionally or because they're, you know, being lazy or anything. Just believe the best. Similarly with resilience, it's a unique experience because every basically 4 hours, you are presented with an opportunity to be resilient, and you have to make a decision to get yourself up, like try and force some calories down your neck, put on your wet, salty, horrible clothes, and then emerge out of that, the relative safety and comfort of the cabin to row 2 hours. And that's a conscious decision. You know, people ask like, oh, how do you build resilience? I firmly believe like it's making those decisions in those moments. Sometimes they creep up on you, I guess in a nice way. You know that's coming up and you're continually, faced by it, so you can build it over time. And the last one around gratitude, nobody forced us to do it.
Right.
It was our decision. And what an amazing environment, what amazing opportunity, rarefied air to be in the position in life to be able to do something like that. So, when the chips are down and you're feeling really bad, like try and put that positive spin on things and like appreciate this once in a lifetime opportunity.
Love that. Thanks for sharing. I looked at it and I'm like, wow, this is freaking awesome. I'm curious from a personal perspective, what did you learn about your own leadership and leadership in general from that experience?
So I wasn't the skipper on the boat. I'd say we were all from a military leadership background. The guys I did it with were a little bit older than I am. But one of the most important things about leadership, I think, is followership. You can't be a leader unless you know what it means to be a good follower. So the three of us who weren't the skipper, I think we really revisited that. And again, our military training was helpful with that. The vehicle for that year that we had at first is you basically taught leadership and everything through the guise of an infantry platoon. And you have different roles, and sometimes you're put in a command position, a leadership position, but most of the time you're a bod and you're having to do what you're told. So that's a really good lesson in being a good follower. And understanding your role on the boat as well, and piece of that like in certain situations and a lot of decisions, like one person needs to be in charge. You can't have certain. It's certainly in the trickier moments and more dangerous moments. You can't make decisions by committee, and you need to do what you're told when you're told to do it as soon as possible. Fortunately, we had confidence. We had a great skipper, so that was made quite easy. Just know your place in a way. Yeah. A personal reflection I had, I think. Are you familiar with the term leader's legs?
I don't think so. No.
So when you're put in a position of responsibility, I think certainly from my experience, it brings more out of you. You feel you have to step up, and in a way, whilst it comes with its stresses and its pressure, in some ways it makes it easier because I don't know where it comes from, but you get a certain, whether it's just me, I'm a bit of a people pleaser, you get that kick of energy, and yeah, I don't know, it makes it easier to deal with the hardships. You've got to put on a brave face. You know that other people are relying on you, and in some aspects, leading is easier. And you see it again. I go back to the military experience. When you'd be on these horrible exercises, and every few hours there'd be the rotation of like command positions, and you'd quickly see somebody who's been like feeling really sorry for themselves as a bod, just trying to stay as dry as possible. Suddenly they're given like platoon sergeant, and they spring into life, and a burst of energy.
Yeah. So it sounds like once you're put in that position of leadership, something else kicks on, right? And it comes to life.
Yeah, and I think in some ways being on the boat was a little bit harder because I didn't have that sort of responsibility. And one of just the realities of doing something like that is it's so mundane. It's just a lot of discomfort and boredom and monotony and like blue and gray. And you got a lot of time alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, as you were sharing that, one of the things that came up in a lot of the work that we do as well is, the idea of followership, right? And I'm truly a believer of knowing when to lead and when to be led. And sometimes there's this idea, like if you're a follower, so to speak, then you're not a leader, so you don't have to do as much. And I think that's a big thing and just knowing you, I think you would agree of how can we show up in our leadership, like just as if we were in the leadership role, right? Like as if we were in there. And one of the things that I tend to see is people on teams, if they're not in the leader role, their energy kind of drops a little bit to just lean back and let them take it. And so the energy drops and the excitement kind of drops, the passion kind of drops. One of the challenges we bring forward is, hey, keep it online, even if you're in quote unquote the follower shoes, because you're actually, I don't see it that way in the sense, like technically you are letting someone else lead, but ultimately you're really not. Like you're still needing to show up at your fullest to contribute to the team, right? Going back to like the teamship.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best definition of leadership I've seen is it's the capacity and will to motivate others to a common purpose and the character which inspires confidence. And anybody can do that. You don't need to be in a leadership position to be able to motivate others to do something or to inspire people with confidence. It's all how you perceive yourself and how you decide to show up. And if you want to have an impact on the people around you, whether you're in a position of authority or a follower, then you can be a leader regardless.
Yeah, so good, so good. One other thing that came to mind, John, was I can imagine as you were sharing the example is when conflict did come up. I'm curious to hear your perspective, and for those listening, in my experience and in my own personal life as well, right? Dealing with conflict, leaning into conflict has been a big journey of mine, and personally, it's been a big thing to shift my attitude and perspective around conflict and seeing that doing it in a healthy way is actually a necessary part of being in a high performance team. And so I'm curious if you're willing to share a couple learnings or even specific examples of, especially in that high stress environment, how you on that road team navigated conflict and what you would want any person listening to understand around conflict based on how you see it now after that.
We didn't really have any conflict on the boat. And I think that's largely because we'd sat down. We spent a whole day on top of all the training and time we spent together, just getting ready for this thing. We spent a day talking about, some of our strengths and weaknesses. We did the psychological assessment thing. And compliant, whatever stuff. And we did like a readout of all that stuff. We articulated our values and our standards. We articulated our goals, and I think that prevented a lot of potential conflict. When you hear stories and experiences from other teams, it kind of goes back to that they're doing it for different reasons. There's a famous documentary, if anybody's interested around, it's James Cracknell, who was an Olympic rower, and Ben Fogle, who did the Atlantic, I think it was about 2005. And James Cracknell, super intense, massively competitive, in it to win it, get the record. Ben Fogle, sort of Hugh Grant-esque, like happy-go-lucky kind of guy, was in it for the experience and probably for the media exposure. They're very different reasons. And you see it if you read the book called The Crossing, or watch there's a documentary on YouTube.
Yeah,
they had some big fallings out. And you can, some of it's explicit, but some of it you can read between the lines. Like certainly Ben Fogle did not have a good time because they were there for different reasons.
Yeah.
So sorry to dodge the question, but we didn't really have much conflict. There were moments where when I felt a bit pissed off, not necessarily with the people around me, but with a situation. I think it's important in those moments. Like there's a space between something happening, like the trigger, and your response. And I've been guilty of not understanding that space and certainly not observing or respecting it in the past, and being quick to anger or respond. But that presence of mind in those moments to take a beat, just slow down a sec, and think about what's going on before rushing to accuse or confront or cause a conflict is really important, because we have a decision in that space. I think it was you guys who brought the Viktor Frankl quote to me, the Holocaust survivor, who made that famous. But yeah, we have a decision there, and specifically if there is something that needs to be addressed, I think it's effective to not focus on the person, but focus on the behavior. If you have agreed and shared values and standards, and people have a good handle on like the right way to do something, that's the standard. And you can talk about the standard that we discussed and we expect, which gives the context to talk about their behavior, not themselves, not their personality, but that thing that they did, very, very specific, and then the impact that it had on yourself or the situation, the team, whatever it may be. It makes it a bit more, I think, tangible and focused and almost less personal, because you're not talking about character or personality. It's about that thing they did.
Yeah, calling out the specific behavior against what we agreed on, essentially, in terms of expectation. Love that. And it sounds like the lack of conflict, if you will, was actually partly or mostly because you all aligned first and foremost on what are we agreeing to here? What are the expectations? How are we agreeing to behave essentially on that boat, right? And when you're in there, and it sounds like you also were all aligned on why you were doing it, the alignment to a common purpose and mission, and not just alignment, but actually bought into the vision in and of itself. And so with that alignment and with that agreement on certain behaviors and how you're going to show up, it sounds like it reduced the amount of conflict that you had on there almost to not being there. So I would even paint the picture, well, when that lacks on a team, there probably is obviously a lot of conflict and misunderstandings.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I'd call out, and is I guess a bit more tactical, is we were very well prepared. We'd had some teams sign up a year before they go. And that's quite a short period of time to do everything you need to do and get yourself physically and mentally and emotionally prepared. We had 2 years, and these guys have been talking about it. I was actually brought in as a fourth team member. They've been talking about it for years. So, we had basically a 2-year training program. We'd have plenty of time to get ready. And we were in the best possible physical, mental, I was going to say emotional condition, but personally, the emotional side of that challenge is probably what I struggle with the most. Like physically, if I was underprepared, emotionally, like underprepared personally. But in terms of like the psychology of the group and our, shared goals, values, etc., like that was on point.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, well, I imagine that you've been able to translate the resilience you got from there in your day-to-day now. Yeah. I'm going to say yes already, even though
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's such a crazy, wild environment.
It was a leading question because I'm like, I know the answer is yes for sure.
It's good for those moments where like you're feeling stressed and some things happen that's bugging you, and I just have that moment like, at least I'm not in the middle of the Atlantic in the middle of a storm about to go and row for 2 hours in the wet. Like, it's only software sales. No one's going to die.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's the reason I can resonate in terms of whatever hard is, it's all relative. But when you do certain things that prove to you how resilient you actually are, and then when the day-to-day, so to speak, comes through, then you can see that you're a lot more capable than you thought. And so, absolutely. Well, I'm looking at time, John. This has been awesome. I loved hearing about your experiences here. And I'm curious, for those listening, when it comes to certain behaviors or things that you would want people to know, just having the experience that you have at Braze, military, even with the road team, what are certain tactical, very practical, specific behaviors and things you would want people to know if they want to move towards having a high-performing team and being part of a high-performing team?
From a leader's perspective?
Yeah, so I would say maybe both lenses would be great to hear from you. So if you're leading the team, and then also if you're part of a team.
Yeah, I think from a leader's perspective, I think it's important to understand the difference between leadership and management. You manage processes and systems, and it's about predictability and risk control and mitigation. And you lead people. People aren't processes or things. There's a certain amount. They come together. And you can't be a good leader without being a good manager. But leadership is more around kind of. It's not necessarily what's going on at the moment. It's what should be happening. In a way, it's it's contrary because you're introducing risk, because you're probably trying to lead people to something new or instigate some sort of change. And they're two quite different things. And, from there, you can, I guess, extrapolate different strategies and different tactics in terms of how you show up for different situations with your manager hat on or with your leader hat on. Beyond that, I think for both leaders and team members, treating what would maybe classically be seen as the soft skills as hard skills. So think about things like empathy. If you ask me, when I was a young soldier, whether empathy was important or like a important leadership skill, I probably would have laughed you out the room. But I love your guys' definition of empathy, which I think is listening to understand someone else's situation whilst managing your own emotions, with the critical emphasis on that second part, right? Manage your own emotions, not listen to respond. It's keeping yourself in check to understand the situation, and as the sales saying goes, all deals are won and lost in discovery. I think the same could be said for a lot of things in life as well. For the subjective things, perception is reality, and you can only understand someone's perception if you listen with empathy. The other softer skills, around collaboration, again, highly built on empathy, but understanding other people's motives, the actions they're taking towards that, and see where the misalignment risk could be or the alignment opportunity could be. And then storytelling. It's such a impactful way to influence people. I mean, we love stories. We've always told stories. We're a storytelling species. And we've all got great stories, whether they're our own stories or whether we've seen it on Netflix, read it in a book, whatever it may be. But there's a skill, it's a craft to be able to, create the arc of a narrative and tell your story in the right way to land a point, and convey it with emotion to get people to be receptive, And when I think about it, whilst, as I say, they're classically seen as soft skills, but they are really hard skills. But if you nail them, I think you can be a phenomenal leader, and certainly a better team member.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I totally resonate with what you were saying around the empathy. Like if you would have asked me as well, yeah, even 7-8 years ago, I'd been like, what are you talking about? And now it's such a fundamental. So yeah, love the breakdown there, really tactical, specific things that leaders can walk away with, whether you're part of a team or not, and develop some of these key skills that you're referring to, John. Super cool. Well, thank you for your time. Again, recognizing it's 9:38 in London. So really appreciate you coming on. Anything that maybe you thought we'd cover or that we'd touch on that you really want to share with listeners before we finish up here?
Wow, covered a lot, haven't we?
We have.
What haven't we covered? I think from just one final call out from a leadership perspective. I think of leadership as service. You are there to serve your team through being a really good leader. It's a privilege. It's an awesome responsibility. To be in a position of authority in someone's life. And certainly, in the professional setting, where we spend just as much time, if not more, with those people in that setting as we do at home. Take it seriously. It's a real craft. Like the work's never done. You can never nail this skill. Like it's a continuous journey, and we often don't get taught it. I was fortunate because I had basically 16 months of leadership training. I don't think there are any other organizations that do that make that kind of investment in their leaders, and it's often the people who just nail the IC role who get put in that leadership position. So yeah, it's a very important profession, and yeah, it needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Bob and John, we'll really appreciate your perspective both on high-performing teams and leadership. I think that the experiences you have and the way you show up, just really, really appreciate you. If we want people to reach out to you, are you cool with us having your LinkedIn on the show notes?
Absolutely, yeah. Cool? I'll manage expectations. I'm terrible at responding to LinkedIn, but I will try and on top of the inbox.
Okay, awesome. Well, keep an eye out just in case. Okay, John. Well, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate your wisdom, and have a great night in London.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Coming on.
My pleasure. A lot of fun. Cheers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for tuning in to this final portion of the Perspective series, final part 3 of 3. Really appreciate you all tuning in. Again, if you haven't checked out the article, go to thoughtium.com/perspectives. You'll find the article there. And if you are interested in going deeper to develop your own team from a leadership or high performance perspective, get in touch with us. We'd love to connect with you. We really hope you found a ton of value in this series and the article and the toolkit. Feel free to share it with others in your network. And we thank you for tuning in, and make sure to tune in to our next episode of Navigating